away, I think, in business. So I volunteered. My name is Kathy Overington. I'm on the trustee with the Germantown Library, and I'd like to welcome Tom again. Tom's History Talks are some of our most popular programs that we do, and we're thrilled when he comes back to share all that wonderful knowledge with us. Of course, exits, you know where they are. There are bathrooms around the corner. And welcome. There is another talk next month.
You have the date. Just look it up before they talk.
Yeah. I do. I have it on my calendar. 28.
The last Thursday, right?
Yeah. Okay. So that would be the 28th. And that one's on
groundwater issues. Yeah.
Okay.
I'll plug it at the end. All right. Thank you. All right. Thanks for coming out, everybody. I do these talks in the middle of winter for a good reason. Even though a mild winter, you know, the crowds come out. There's not a whole lot else to do. I'm going to talk tonight about the history of North Germantown. It's an extremely large topic, so I'm going to hit on some of the big points and leave the rest probably for a part two or a follow-up talk. That building there, Donald, you remember that building?
Yeah. Off the dock.
That's right. We'll come around to that. I'm going to start the talk off with one of the most significant archaeological sites in the whole Hudson Valley. And this archaeological dig went on from 1956 through 1960, so a 5-year dig. And this is on what's now Sunset Circle. And originally that was part of the town of Claremont. I'll get to that in a minute. But this dig was done in the late 1950s. Back then, that was all farmland. Now it's a cul-de-sac with 5 or 6 houses on it. This dig revealed a preponderance of projectile points, which you see on the left-hand side of that screen, and quite a bit of pottery also on the right-hand side. There's a number of hearths were also discovered in this archaeological dig. The interpretation of the archaeologists who did the work is that this was a seasonal hunting and fishing camp. This is way up at the northern end of Germantown, almost to the cliff that falls down into the Roll of Jansen Kill. So they were just in from the cliff. And some of these artifacts go back as far as the lithic stage. So we're talking about 8,000 or so BC. The majority of the artifacts that they found were from the woodland period, which started around 1000 BC and ended about 1000 AD. So this is by far the most significant archaeological site ever uncovered in Germantown. And it's basically Sunset Circle, between Sunset Circle and the road jam. This is our best image of the original Cadwallader Colden map from 1740. He had yet to become governor. He was the surveyor general of New York province at that time. And this map was done at that time in 1740 because that's when the land was divided up officially among the remaining Palatines. The Palatines arrived here in October 1710. Quite a few of them left in late 1712 and later and went off to the Schoharie Valley and the Mohawk Valley. The relatively few who remained here in what became Germantown were granted land in 1740. And this map represents the division of it. Like I said, this is the original, which is in private hands. There's a long backstory to that, but detour into it right now. But for our purposes tonight, right up here, you see the northern line starts at Roberts Point. Now this is currently buried behind the railroad. The shoreline is actually quite a bit back from the present day shoreline. Roberts Point is important to remember while we go through this talk.
It's underwater?
the railroad was built and kind of cut it off. So now
It's on Riverside?
it's on the land side now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is the same map, just traced out and made a little bit more easy to read. And you can see the approximate path of Anchorage Road. On the Colton map, when you see these dotted lines, that means it's a road, but it's going across a property. If you see a solid black line, that's a road that is also a property line. So the approximate path of today's Anchorage Road down to the river is represented here. And it goes right through Lot 1, which was granted to Christian Haber, Haber, later became the last name Hover, Hover, which is the name of the room that we're sitting in right now. One other thing I'll point out before we move on. Walt Miller, the town historian and Columbia County historian years ago, when he would write about the Palatines, he would talk about the garden plots. The Palatines, especially the first couple of years, lived in camps, and they were each assigned relatively small, what he called garden plots, places to grow their own vegetables. They were being supplied bread and beer by Robert Livingston the Elder, but they were also allowed to grow their own vegetables on these garden plots. And there's about 10 or so represented right here. And if you look at a Google, I don't have it on the slide tonight, but if you do a Google Earth or Google Maps overview of North Germantown, if you look, follow Northern Boulevard off of 9G or down towards the southern end of Northern Boulevard, you'll see our almost perfect rectangle of forest. And that corresponds pretty well with this, you know, it's all one property now. It's not 10 different tiny little properties, but it does correspond almost perfectly with the garden plots of North Germantown. This is a little bit later map. This is the 1851 Gillette map of Columbia County. Not North Germantown related, but this map really badly flubs Elizaville. If you're familiar with how Elizaville looks on the map, you can see how badly they've got it. Map makers, it took them until like the 1890s to really perfect how to represent Elizaville on a map. Here it's like part of Gallatin, part of Livingston, and those of you who are familiar, Claremont, the town of Claremont has a bit of a tail that kind of follows the county line, and the road smushed in between the county line and the road down in that area. Also, somewhat misrepresented is the amount of shoreline that the town of Livingston has on the Hudson River, and some of the lines here are a little bit off with Germantown and Claremont as well. I included this map primarily to show how the original town of Claremont was situated here, completely wrapped all the way around Germantown. And that dates back to the decision by Robert Livingston the Elder to sell 6,000 acres back to the Royal Crown, which was used to settle the Palatine zone. Robert Livingston the Elder, the original Robert Livingston, did not want to give away any shore access to the Rojan, because if they had access to the Rojan, they would be able to build a mill on the Rojan and generate some wealth of their own. And he wanted to keep control of that, at least in his family. What became the town of Claremont later, this was granted to Robert the Builder, Robert Claremont Livingston. He's the son of Robert Livingston the Elder. The story is that he helped his father ward off a Indian raid on the manor house. The original Livingston Manor House is just into the town of Livingston. It's at the mouth of the Rojan. Present day, it's the site of the Rojan Boat Club, Rojan Creek Boat Club. And this, as the story goes, Robert of Claremont, or Robert the Builder, as he's called sometimes, he was granted all of the so-called Lower Manor, which is a bit of a misnomer. So it's all of what became the town of Claremont. That was granted to Robert the Builder. by his father in return for warding off the Indian raid. Um, yeah, in the records, it's sometimes referred to as the Lower Manor, especially in secondary sources. In reality, Livingston, it was not a separate manor. He basically gifted his favorite son, Robert, that land. The eldest son, Philip Livingston, inherited the whole rest of Livingston Manor. So we're talking about the town of Livingston, present day town of Taconic, town of Gallatin, and also Copiac and Agram off to the side of this map. This northern part here of northern fringe of Claremont was by an act of the state legislature given to and annexed by the town of Germantown in 1858. Don't have a great explanation. I have no primary source explanation for why Claremont gave that away and why Germantown accepted it. One of the theories is that the village of Claremont down in this area, that Chancellor Livingston and Thomas Broadhead and William Wilson all worked so hard to build this village up. The theory is that this northern tip of Claremont was just so far away from the village of Claremont or hamlet of Claremont that it was just easier to add it to Germantown to be closer to the center of Germantown. But again, that's just speculation. I haven't uncovered anything in the primary sources that explains that. And this is a little bit older, a better map, but this is the 1798 Weagram map. It's a little bit more accurate because it was done to document the exact boundaries of Livingston Manor. There you can see Roberts Point. That was used as one of the northern ends of Germantown. The other end here, right in this corner here, that was called the Pot, P-O-T-T, in the deed. And if you're familiar with that piece of land, I wrote about it somewhat recently. It's Dalesbridge Road and Helsley Road. Between the bridge and Dalesbridge Road and Helsley Road, there's a stretch of land in there that's almost like it was hit by a crater. It's very kind of dark because there's a lot of cedar trees in there. It's basically just a huge depression with a small creek or two running through there. It dumps into the Rojan, just behind the Germantown Sportsman's Club. But that's what it was referred to in the original deed when Robert Livingston sold it back to New York Province. You can also see on this map the widow Livingston. That's Tippy. Walter Livingston, who built that mansion, he died in 1797, I believe. So 1 year before this map was made, his wife Cornelia Schuyler Livingston is represented there on the map as Widow Livingston. You can see Dalesbridge, where it is today, would be almost ramrod straight here. But on this map, the road leads quite a ways north along a little bit gentler grade and it crosses the Rojan over here. Oh, so before I get too far into the photographs, one thing that befuddled me for a long time about this map is this house here, which to me that looks kind of like a M-E-D, M-E-E-D. However, that's actually N-E-H, rendered kind of difficult to read there. That's for Nehemiah Mead, he was a newcomer to town from, I believe, Connecticut. He's an important gentleman, as is J. Tenbrook. His house is right here. That house still exists, kind of, under a whole bunch of additions. It's on the Heller Farm on Hoover Avenue. John Tenbrook's also a very important player in the story of North Germantown. We also have Seymour Winans, William Chatmose, Esquire Delamater, and Peter Sharp down here on the Sharp's Landing Road. They're all going to factor in pretty heavily in the story of North Germantown. That is Nehemiah Mead's house, built roughly 1796. Like I said, he's a settler from New England. Both of the churches in Germantown at that time, both conducting services in the German language, still in 1796. Lutheran and Reformed churches. So Nehemiah Mead played a big role in bringing Methodism to Germantown. All the services were conducted in English. That's another view of the Mead house. This house was torn down in 1995 or so. Maybe some of you guys might remember it. It's 48 Route 9G. It's just a little bit north of where Hoover Avenue came out onto 9G. There's a more modern house on that spot now. Yeah, it's a log cabin looking house that's on that site there. The Mead family was important because that house is where the initial Methodist meetings were held. In that era, Nehemiah Mead was a reverend, as was his grandson, and the other very important person in this circle was Reverend John Crawford, who's his primary base was in Asbury, which is a hamlet in the town of Saugerties, right on the border of Saugerties and Catskill. And he would come across the river to preach in the Mead house before they ever had a church building. The Mead family also had a cemetery. They buried the family dead out behind the farm. You can see the log cabin looking house in the background there. That's on the site of the Mead house. I'm actually not on that property. I'm on the Heller farm, right at the northern edge of that property line, looking north. There's a little pond there, and there's a little bit of high ground, nice flat high ground. And that's the site of the Mead family cemetery. And a lot of the stones were still there as recently as the 1970s, like when Arthur Kelly went around and documented all the cemeteries in town. There was still some 8 to 10 stones there, including a large obelisk for Nehemiah Mead. All of those are gone now, except for one. The Hellers found a stone kind of poking out of the dirt a little bit there and moved it over to the Tenbrook Cemetery, which I'll talk about in a minute, just to get it out of the way, because otherwise it would be destroyed by a lawnmower. Now, I pointed out J. Tenbrook on the Weaver map earlier, and this is on the Heller farm. This is just a little island of trees in the farm field, and this is the old Tenbrook family cemetery. One of these families, I mentioned a bunch of the Dutch families in North Germantown, Delamater, Chatmos, Tenbrook. These are not Palatine families. These are old Kingston Dutch and Albany Dutch families. One of the families that intermarried heavily with the Kingston Dutch was the Sharp family of Sharp's Landing Road. Peter Sharp's wife was a lady by the name of Blandina Delamater, and her father, I believe, was born in Kingston, or born in Ulster County anyway, and he moved up here to Germantown, I believe, after Peter and Blandina were married, and that he's the Esquire Delamater who's on the map that I showed you previously. Other families that are intermarried here are the DeWitt family, another Kingston Dutch family name. So that's the general milieu of the Tenbrook, Delamater, Chatmos family of North Germantown. Walt Miller's always said that one of the legends he heard is that the slaves, the people who were enslaved by the Ten Brook family here are also buried at this cemetery. That would correspond with the Bowery in Claremont, another Ten Brook family farm, family plot there. And legend has it that the people enslaved by that family in Claremont, cousins of these people, were also buried at that family plot. And if you can see that picture well, there's a tree stand in in the Ten Brook Cemetery. It's an overgrown little chunk of land, and it's used for hunting. Perfect little tree stand, wide open field off to the side.
So I can
Yes.
go back to that picture.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Yeah, on the left, are those the gravestones?
Yeah, that's 4 gravestones. One on the bottom center is broken in half. Yeah. If I remember correctly, this one here, the skinnier one leaning against the tree, that's a Mead family gravestone. That's the one that the Hellers found kind of poking out of the dirt in the Mead cemetery. They're 200 or 300 feet apart. They're pretty quick walk across the farm fields. They're pretty close together. So I was getting towards Methodism. This was a postcard put together. E.L. Denninger was the owner at one point of the store. That's still a store building that's on Anchorage Road. It's still standing as a private residence. And stores back then would issue their own postcards. This was from a series of postcards issued by that store. It's a little bit tricky because there's a history of Methodism in Germantown that was written about 1900 or so by one of the reverends at the church, and then there's a 1950s era history of Methodism in Germantown, written and published as a pamphlet around that time. The first one written by the Reverend was never really published. It's an unpublished manuscript that we have in the history department. The pamphlet later on was much more widely circulated. And this is a small excerpt from the Reverend's history from right around 1900 or so. And according to this, the first Methodist church was built roughly 1844. That's another discrepancy with the later history that put the date at 1848. Enlarged and beautified 1871, and then burned down in 1898. Well, so this church would be dedicated in 1898 after the previous one burned down. That church that I just showed you would burn down on January 14th, 1914. I'll show you a couple more photographs. This is in the same footprint where the current Methodist church is, and that's an art studio, and the parsonage is a residence now. But this is Camp Creek Road as it heads towards 9G, as it meanders towards 9G. When this photograph was taken, 9G didn't exist. There's another view of the church that was there from 1898 to 1914. Now, if you read that 1950s era church history, the impression you get is that this building was here from 1848 till it burned down in 1914. I do have plenty of other sources on the 1914 fire. I don't have really anything besides the Reverend's account of that 1898 fire that destroyed the previous church. So it's something I have to do a little bit more research on to really be confident of that fact. So one of the other things that's going on as Methodism is gaining ground, especially in North Germantown. This is an excerpt from the Columbia Washingtonian. The Washingtonian movement was almost like a predecessor of Alcoholics Anonymous. They really wanted to treat alcoholism as a disease. A lot of inebriate asylums are built in this time frame, 1840s, 1850s. a couple of, I won't read the whole thing, but there's a couple of excerpts in here that are very interesting. He talks about visiting, he's the person who spreading the word, D. Stainsby. He spoke in Germantown at the schoolhouse near Sturgis Tavern, I believe. That he's talking about where the Reformed Church sits now. There was a schoolhouse there. I believe that's where he's talking, but he says the congregation was not large, but a certain squire and deacon of the church was there, who with the barkeeper seemed to make very light of the temperance cause and annoyed our friend's son. Uh, no wonder the poor man who is dissipated does not take hold when officers in the town and church show no better example. And I can't say 100% for sure, but I believe he's talking about Captain George Rockefeller, who was a town supervisor. He was he died. He was part of the Chevy boat accident in 1845. So George Rockefeller died 3 years after this. He was like I said, a town supervisor and also owned a town, and also pretty heavily involved in the Reformed Church as well. So I'm 99% sure that this guy Stainsby is calling out Captain George Rockefeller with this here. Also notable here is he mentions in the evening at the chapel near Captain Tenbrook's. Had a very large congregation, 14 names were added. The Washingtonians were big on people taking the pledge against alcoholism, against drinking at all. And the chapel that he's talking about, Walt Miller called it the Campbellite Chapel. But I've talked to some people who know their religious history, especially 19th century religious history, really well. The Campbellite movement was kind of more of a southern thing. It was really big in like Kentucky, Tennessee area. But there was a similar sort of movement called the Christian Church movement. And that was also big in the 1840s. And it was basically a non-denominational movement within, it was most closely aligned with Methodism, but the basic gist was that it was non-denominational type of church. They built a chapel. It was located where just north of Ralph's Country Realty, the next lot north, where there's the remnants of a trailer park and like a few other buildings. We think it's on some maps. We think it was located right about on that spot. And Lutherans and Reformed and Methodist and non-denominational all preached in that building alike, and it was taken down after the Methodist Church built its own church there in North Germantown. I mentioned the fire that destroyed the Methodist Church on January 14th, 1914. The Germantown Fire Department was only 6 years old when this happened, and they were credited with saving the parsonage, which was built just a year prior to this fire. And that parsonage still stands today. It's a private home. And the church was rebuilt. I'll show you some pictures in a minute. You can see the church bell kind of in the middle of that picture there. That's a better close-up shot of just how warped the bell got during this fire. This was the successor Methodist Church, either the second or the third, depending on which account you take to heart. This building still stands today. It's used as a ceramic studio, art studio. A few other pictures of it. The people who own it now, they're very generous. When they took the pews out of the church a couple of years ago, they donated one of the relatively small ones to the history department. So we do have a remnant pew from that church. I was never in that church before they ripped the pews out, but it had kind of curved pews, and some of the pews that were taken out of it seemed like they were made out of oak. It was very substantial, solid wood that they're made out of. some of them were like 18, 20 feet long. I don't know how they got, I don't know how they got in or how they got out of the building. And luckily, I was able to find one that was relatively small, only 9 feet long or so. We got it down to the parsonage garage, and there it sits as a little remnant. The other great thing about the people who own this church and parsonage now is they also own the cemetery on the other side of the building. The church, when the church folded in 2010, they never made any provision to separate the cemetery from the other property. So it's all one property. And but I was cleaning that cemetery the summer that these folks purchased the property, and they just had the crew that was working on the church and the parsonage. They just sent them over, and they all stood the stones up. So that there was something like 50 to 60 gravestones on the ground, falling apart in various states of disrepair, and they restored it in 2022. Stood all the old stones back up. There's a little bit of work left to do. It's in so much better shape than it was just a couple of years ago. That's one the one shot of the interior that I have in that church. There's a shot of the parsonage alone. Uh, Now this building, this was the District 1 schoolhouse. This is on Camp Creek Road, just a little bit south of the church. This building's not here anymore. Yeah, so just as Camp Creek Road starts to bend and heads down the hill towards Camp Creek. And this is one of the classes here. I think I have one or two class pictures in the slideshow tonight. In my Civil War talk on Germantown, I talk a lot about Theodore Robinson, who's the only Black man from Germantown to serve in the Civil War. And this photograph is pretty notable because two of his children are in it. This is Rutherford Robinson here, a boy named after Rutherford B. Hayes. Speaking of Methodism, Theodore Robinson served as a lay preacher in the Methodist Church in North Germantown, and his son Rutherford there, when he grew up, became an ordained Methodist preacher and preached at Cheviot Methodist Church. And the other thing I should mention about Methodism in Germantown, Methodism was the only denomination that ever had two churches going simultaneously in Germantown. We had the one in North Germantown, and also the building that's now the American Legion Hall was a Methodist church from 1891 till 1939. Theodore Robinson's other child here is Katie Robinson. Theodore and Mary Robinson had three children that survived to adulthood. Rutherford and three girls, including Katie here. And one other great story here. Marguerite Ryder was one of my predecessors as historian, and she labeled this photograph really, really well because I believe her father's in there somewhere. I think Hoffman was her maiden name. Anyway, she labeled this. Almost everybody on here is labeled, including Luther Finger, the father of Pete Finger, who died almost in his early 90s. And just a great story that Marguerite wrote down in the description of this photograph was that the teacher in the school district nearly killed Luther Finger, had him sit in his seat choking him after he threw an eraser at Jay Moore. and Jay Moore, as most of you know, grew up to be a long-time town supervisor here in Germantown. This is the 1888 Beers Atlas map of Columbia County, zoomed in on North Germantown. And so School District 1, which I showed you the last few slides, located here, SH, this is Camp Creek Road, like I said, right as it bends, the Methodist Episcopal Church right here, Parsonage. District 6 is located Schoolhouse up here, SH. So in 1888, there's no 9G. This a lot of this road, like I said, Camp Creek Road, a lot of this road down here is kind of abandoned now, off into the woods to the west of 9G. Let's see, from here, from about where the schoolhouse is, here down to the road gen, that's modern day Block Factory Road. 9G at the present time runs ramrod straight down the hill. In 1888, you couldn't build a road ramrod straight down the hill. You had to build a switchback trails, which Block Factory Road is basically one giant switchback trail. The District 6 schoolhouse kind of slowly rotted away at the southern end of Block Factory Road and 9G. And there's a fence built there somewhat recently. The last I was able to see in there, there was a little bit of pile of brick, foundation rubble there still. But I'm sure a lot of you remember there was one wall that just stayed there a lot longer than the whole rest of the building, and just slowly rotted away. That's what it looked like in better days at the school district. Like I said, Claremont, this is part of the town of Claremont, District 6, until 1858. So it started out as a town of Claremont district school. In later years, it was a joint district school with Germantown and I think a little bit of Livingston, actually. One other picture of teacher and students. So this map is from 1899, 1900, something like that. Horatio Mould, Mould. His main base of operations was up in Troy, New York. He was an ice dealer. He built these ice houses. There's two giant ice houses just south of today's Lasher Park. The railroad came through here in 1851. Prior to that, Roberts Point was used as a dock, but much more traffic went to Sharp's Landing, Sharp's Dock. And Sharp's Landing was cut off, was destroyed by the construction of the railroad in 1851. And in sources from the 1860s and 70s, you start to hear about Germantown New Dock. And it's not always clear where it is, but Germantown New Dock, so-called, in the 1860s, 70s, 80s, was located about where the boat ramp at North Germantown is now. They had to build something there because the bays at North Germantown on both sides of Lasher Park both got cut off. The Peary Homestead Bay, even further north, that was cut off. Sharp's Landing, Sharp's Dock was literally destroyed. It's under the railroad bed, we think, somewhere in there. And Cheviot Bay got cut off. All these little bays that were used by regular people to bring boats in and out got destroyed. In 1866, I think it was, the town of Germantown applied to create so-called Germantown New Dock. So that has always been a public dock. Everything on the river side of the railroad tracks down there in North Germantown did not exist in 1866. It was underwater. The town started with building a dock in 1879. That's when the Half Moon Anchorage building gets built. I have plenty of pictures of that coming up. But this shows you approximate path of Anchorage Road here. Wine and store at this time. I mentioned it as E.L. Deniger's store. This building still exists here around the corner as you make that last turn down to Lasher Park. And the town dock was the first thing built there. There's also another dock here, a private dock belonging to Horatio Mould at this point. There's a small boarding house, which I think I have some pictures in the slideshow for you, and two giant ice houses that take up most of this real estate here. and here from out in the river, standing on ice, looking back towards the North Germantown area. This is the older of the two ice houses, and this is the one that Horatio Mould built. It's this contraption looking thing. This is part of this big ice house here. A little bit of open space for a private dock, and then this was the Half Moon Anchorage building that the town of Germantown built in 1879, basically to improve the public dock, which they had constructed some 10, 12 years prior to that. In its original iteration, the upper level of the Half Moon Anchorage was used heavily for hay storage. Farmers would bring their hay down here, store it, and then have a boat pull right up. And then there were doors up top here. You could just throw your hay bales right into the ship to bring it into New York City. New York City before cars, it's all horses going back and forth in New York City. There's a tremendous amount of hay and grain needed just to keep New York City, keep people moving in New York City. This is a photograph from, I believe, 1941, Boy Scouts doing a flag raising, I think for July 4th. This is after the ice houses were all gone. And at this point, it's still open land down there. Now remember that triangle when we get to the next few slides. That's how the Anchorage is an incredibly large building. You know, when the ice houses were there, the ice houses dwarfed the Anchorage building, but the Anchorage building in its own right was massive structure. Lasher Park today takes up most of this, or not, a lot of this real estate where there's boats docked. The Hudson River shipping channel was last dredged in the very early 1960s. And one of the many places that the dredged spoils were dumped in that time frame was in that area. And basically all of Ernest R. Lasher Jr. Memorial Park is dredged spoil. All of that land dates to the early 1960s. This one taken by Court Myers, Eugene Van Cortlandt Myers, the famous photographer and Civil War veteran. That's one of the best photographs. And show you this one that has the 1879 date. I also have a relic at the history department that gives the date that it was built. And in this photograph, it's called the Germantown Steamboat Dock, and that's for most of its history. That's what it was called. Starting around 1936 or so, it becomes known as the Half Moon Anchorage and Recreation Center. 1936 to about 1941. So most people think of it as the Half Moon Anchorage, but it really didn't operate as a recreation center or a community center for very long. It was only about 5 years, give or take. So this is what it looked like in the years after the ice houses were torn down. Don't know an exact date when the ice houses were torn down. The anchorage itself survived until 1958. And that triangle on the top of the building, that was to denote that the Half Moon Anchorage was a seaplane refueling stop. It was the only place between Poughkeepsie and Albany where a seaplane could stop and refuel. And there's a picture of some of the seaplanes. And in 1939, Eleanor Roosevelt, First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, visited the Half Moon Anchorage as a way to promote the usage of seaplanes. In the white suit there is Dr. Hugh Henry. He was the Commodore of the Half Moon Anchorage Recreation Center at that time. Uh, this is a very curious letter in the history department files. It's a copy, and it's a letter from A.J. Bonesack, Alvin J. Bonesack, the president of the Germantown Telephone Company at that time, to Mrs. Roosevelt, uh, trying to collect on a debt run up by her uncle Valley Hall III, and he Valley Hall ended up owing money just about everywhere. Yeah, he's alcoholic, and just got himself in trouble generally all through his life. Um, I showed this because AJ Bonesack, um, he not exactly sure how it worked. I believe he wound up with ownership of the Half Moon Anchorage after the town decided not to fix it up in 1958. And AJ Bonesack, they were taking the building down piece by piece, and he got hit pretty hard in the head by a beam as they were dismantling that building. He didn't die right away, but he died soon thereafter of the injuries in the hospital. One of the other things the Bonesacks and other families are very heavily involved with at North Germantown was the outboard motor races. These were very popular from the 40s right on through the 70s and probably a little beyond there too. So some of the events at the Half Moon Anchorage drew just a tremendous amount of people. You see how many cars there are lined up there with very little of the parking lot that's currently there and none of Ernest R. Lasher Jr. Memorial Park. This is one of the news articles we have here. Jay Moore, who was the town supervisor at that point in 1958, it fell to him, to make a decision, and the town board at that time, to make a decision on what to do with this building. The piers that were sunken in, foundation piers were being undermined a little bit. Like I said, all this land is underwater acreage in 1866. Fast forward to 1958, some of the pilings that they drove as foundation for this building were starting to fail. I believe it needed a roof at that time too, and the town decided to sell the building at that point, and shortly thereafter is when it was dismantled. Before it was dismantled, so this photograph I show in part to give you a sense of how many other buildings were there. This was a series of a few different barns that were built together at various stages. You also have tower number 78, observation tower number 78 on the Hudson River Railroad, later the New York Central Railroad, and two manual crossing arms. This, I believe, is a coal house. And you can see the roof line of the newer ice house in the distance here. This is one of my favorite photographs in the whole history department collection. You can see Tower 78 in the background, and this is a steam engine carrying sand and stone from the dock at North Germantown going out to Bingham Mills. This had to be 1907, 1908. The power dam at Bingham Mills came online in 1908, and just took a tremendous amount of concrete to build that electric dam on the ruins of Charles Bingham's mills, which are on the ruins of previous mills at that site. The building off to the right here is that house was built by George Ephraim Lasher, Civil War veteran of the 128th Regiment. His wife is Mary Elizabeth Winans. I showed you Seymour Winans and another Winans on the Uyghur map from 1798. There's another Dutch family. It's not a Palatine name. They had quite a bit of land that's now on Northern Boulevard. If you look back on deeds for a lot of the properties on Northern Boulevard, it is traced back slowly but surely to the Winans family. And it's just another shot from that same time. This is a small road. I mentioned that conglomerate of barns there, and in this shot, they're on the right. Hudson River's on the left in this photograph. Driveway, yeah, private road driveway running along here. This building here was the North Germantown train station. Very small little building. There was also what was referred to as a coal house here. Um, to supply trains if needed, and also a watch box. And this is for railroad employees who had to manually operate these crossing arms. The crossing arms, obviously, at the time were not automatic, not electronic like they are now. And there you can see the train station with an actual North Germantown sign on it there. There's a little bit better shot of the coal house. You can see uh, the Winans, Lasher, Deniger, John Smith store. It was operated by many different people over the time. And that building still exists at the corner. And the Lasher house, George E. Lasher, later his son Clark D. Lasher's house is in the background here. A lot of people have a hard time believing that Clark Lasher house could have ever fit there in that tiny little, because it just falls right off into the bay. Right, like we're right behind where the house was, it just drops right off. It's almost unbelievable if you go walk by there, drive by there now, to think that a house of that size or of any size fit in that spot. There's the North Germantown Comfort Station. And Clark Lasher, George Lasher's house in the background. Uh, this is the a railroad map from the early 1900s, 19 teens, I believe. And this just shows the conglomerate of barns, station, STA, right here. Coal house, cabins, agent dwelling. That's George Ephraim Lasher and his son Clark D. Lasher. Clark D. Lasher was a ticket agent at the New York Central. I mentioned E.L. Deniger's store a few different times. Um, as far as the earliest name associated with this house that I know of is Winans. Like I said, the Winans family owned a lot of farmland off to the north here. There are sort of the remnants of a road that kind of squiggles through the woods and the farmland back through there, and that was at one time known as Winans Road. You know, it was abandoned quite a long time ago. Like I said, Winans, and then at some point it's E.L. Deniger's store and post office. At one later on, it's known as Lasher and Deniger, and at one point, John Smith, not the John Smith we know, but his grandfather or great grandfather, also by the name John Smith, operated this store as well. Uh, and just like at Cheviot, the postal and on Main Street, the same thing. The post office contracts would bounce back and forth. They're very competitive. Guys would try to undercut each other to get these post office contracts because it's guaranteed money. So it would end up in this guy's store, then this guy's house, and then, it would bounce around. So the post office was in that Deniger store, and then it was in one of these dwellings here in North Germantown as well. This is a little bit further up the hill on Anchorage Road. You can sort of see the roof line of one of the ice houses here in the back. Just very quickly mention before I finish up here, this is the Peary homestead. So there was a family by the name of Peary I mentioned earlier. They owned quite a bit of property with a large bay that was cut off by the railroad. If you go down to that bay today, just like most of the bays in Germantown, it's starting to silt in to the point where it's almost land, unless it's in flood stage. But Captain Peary used that bay pretty heavily. All the Pearys, all the men in that family were boatmen, so-called. They would make a little bit of money off of shipping. They make a little bit of money off of fishing. They made their living off the river, like a lot of men did back then. Architecturally, this is notable as an example of a Carpenter Gothic building from the mid 1800s. The couple who own it now have added onto it quite a bit, but they've kept the general look of the house pretty well. And at one time, it belonged to Raymond Crawford, I believe. And yeah, is that right? Yeah, that's yeah. In the mid 20th century, known as the Allardyce, because of that. So I'll leave it off there. You can follow me on Instagram at Germantown History or at Columbia County Historians, same handles on Facebook. Email me at germantownhistory@gmail.com. You can also reach me at historian at columbiacountynewyork.com. Columbia County Historian website is also there as well as the Friends of Historic Germantown website. Kathy, when's the next talk? The last Thursday in March?
Yeah.
March 28th, 5:30. We'll be talking about groundwater issues in Germantown over the years. And tomorrow night, if you're not doing anything, 7 p.m., there's a staff versus faculty volleyball game for charity at Germantown Central School. $2 admission and canned good for charity. So, yeah, God knows what you'll see if you come to that. If anybody has any questions or any stories they want to tell about North Germantown, feel free.
Could you go back to the first slide or two you were
Sure.
showing on the Indian?
Yeah.
That's on the south side of where the road jam comes into the river. Is that what you?
Yeah, it's on the Germantown side of the road jam. Very steep cliff that goes up from the basin of the creek, and that.
So is this book? Is there where are the artifacts? Or where was the record of the excavation?
The artifacts are at the New York State Museum in Albany.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was done by state archaeologists, man by the name of Funk, last name Funk, and last name Ritchie.
You said it was like the late 1950s?
Yeah, late 1950s. It was about a 4 or 5 year dig. And one of the most significant sites in the whole Hudson Valley.
So I live in the Hamlet, Claremont Hamlet.
Okay.
So we've been, we meaning Don and myself, have been investigating a dig that was done when the Iroquois pipeline came through.
Yeah.
And that was like, it was not a couple of years, it was like maybe a couple of weeks.
Yeah. Yep.
And there was a report generated, which I don't know if you have a copy of it.
So I have a book that the pipeline published a book on all the archaeological sites, and there's, it's for public consumption anyway. There's only about 4 or 5 pages of that book that deal with so-called Site 211 or 212.
Right, 211.
Yeah, 211.
Only a couple of pages because
but there should be a professional report somewhere.
There is.
Yeah.
So I got in touch with the SHPO and after much like, who are you, why you want this,
Yeah.
They sent me this report, which is bigger than a couple of pages. So I'm trying to interact with the tribe because the conclusions of that report are that that site, um, it's under a farm field, so like the, like the first couple of feet were completely disturbed.
Yeah.
But they went down, and as you said, it was like a very, very old site.
Yeah.
And it's also on the, as I just gotta go like down to the level of the kill.
Yeah.
Is what was excavated, and as the bank goes up, which is kind of high there, they I guess they didn't find anything up there. But we're trying to talk with the tribe, and because this is the whole area is had a complex culture for like a few thousand years.
Yeah.
So this site, so if you don't have the report from that I have.
I've never chased it down, but
I'll send you, I'll have it digitally, I'll send it to you.
Okay. Yeah, so that village that you're describing, site 211 as
yeah, 211.
One of the key differences between that site and the Ford site here in Germantown is at site 211, they found what are called middens.
Yeah.
Basically garbage dumps, large garbage dumps. And typically when archaeologists see that, they interpret it as more of a longer term type of settlement, more of like a fixed established place. They never found any middens at the Ford site.
Yeah.
They just found a lot of projectile points. So that's why it's interpreted as a seasonal hunting, fishing camp. It's also hard living along the river in wintertime, even now. As I can.
So we didn't see it was too easy living along that close to the hill because it's a floodplain.
It is, yeah.
Which get like recently get flooded.
Yeah. The other kind of interesting thing about Site 211, a lot of historians are of the opinion that the reason why the Ten Brook Bowery was built where it was is because it's just downstream from this village and there's easy access to trade with that village. Also, right in front of the Bowery, if you've ever been down it in a canoe, you'd know that the creek does a pretty terrible fish hook right there, right in front of the house. And it's almost impossible not to get your canoe or kayak totally turned around in that spot. So a very easily defensible spot on the Roll Jansen Kill, just a short distance downstream of that Indian village. That's a theory that some historians have about why the Bowery is where it is.
It makes sense. It's also interesting that building is built at a spot that avoids getting flooded. It's like, see, like, why did you put it there? Well, that's right up. Well, it's like that site is like in between the falls in Elizaville and the Binghamsville.
Yeah, it's kind of in between. Yeah. Were there any questions, person? Yeah.
Was there a block back there?
Yeah. Not concrete block. Yeah. It was a block and tackle factory built around 1820 by Moncrief Livingston. It was on the site of the so-called manor mills in the previous era when the Palatines, when Robert Livingston and his wife Alida had the contract to make bread and supply the Palatines with beer and bread. They made those products at the manor mills, which were just a little bit upstream of 9G's bridge now, even a little bit further upstream of the old bridge, the old block factory bridge, which you can still see the abutments there. That's the approximate site of the manor mills on the Livingston side of the creek, just a little bit up from there. And on that spot is where the block and tackle factory was built. 1820s, that was a big business for ships and for early industrial production. Block and tackle was absolutely necessary for both of those. Oh yeah, no concrete block, just block and tackle.
Yeah, I was wondering where it was.
Yeah, it was on the Livingston side, and it's kind of low ground. Say maybe a tenth of a mile upstream from the 9G bridge. So, yeah. Yes, Dennis.
You talked about Claremont being a block now.
Yeah.
First I've ever heard of that.
Is that right?
Did it go like maybe behind our property?
It did. It did, yeah. So all of
And came across like
Yeah.
all block property?
yeah, all of it, just about, yeah. And
And then to Sunset Circle.
the closest the original 6,000 acres came to the road end was that place called the Pot, which is
Yeah.
Helsley Road, Passbridge Road.
That's basically Claremont now, right?
Well, yeah, it's close. It's in there.
Yeah.
It's real close, yeah. But that's the closest Palatines were getting to the road end at that point.
Right.
Yeah, like I said,
Maybe to the east of Heller's Field right there or whatever.
somewhere around there was the one. And like I said, the only theory I've ever heard thrown out there is that the village of Claremont was just too far away from that relatively disconnected chunk of town. I don't know. I'm not completely satisfied with that explanation, but I've never found any better one. So. Is there a question?
Yeah, yeah, one on Zoom. Walter asks, what does the EL stand for in EL? That his wife's great grandfather was Eugene Deniger, daughter was.
That's a good question. I'll have to get back to you on that.
And Carrie commented, the schoolhouse flagpole looks like the old pole at Electric Park.
Yeah, the flagpole in those photographs is not the same pole. The old pole that was there until 2022 is a big, huge, long story. I don't want to take all night, but
You don't have enough fun.
yeah. That flagpole was in front of GCS from approximately 1925 till about 1983 when Ernest R. Lasher Jr. Memorial Park was dedicated. At that time, it was brought down there, and that flagpole came off the Seth Lowe tugboat, which pulled the original USS Monitor down to Hampton Roads, Virginia. And they got to Virginia just one night before the Battle of Hampton Roads. So it was the most significant piece of national history we've ever had here in Germantown. And it was cut up and thrown away 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Yeah. But yeah. If you want me to tell the whole story, it's about a half hour long. Yeah, I'll talk more. I have written about that, like, so if you go look back through Facebook or Instagram, you can find my writing about the whole. Were there any more questions?
When did the Camp Creek School disappear? Is that it?
Oh, okay. Another good question. Before me, I don't know if there's anybody. Do you remember the one on Camp Creek Road near the bend?
Would that be like Jimmy Maglio's house?
More like where the crimes live. The multiple crime houses there. It was in there somewhere. I don't remember it. It was gone before me, and I don't have any documentation of when it was torn down. All right. If there's no other questions, thanks so much for coming out, and hopefully see you again in March.
Thank you.
School then commented, said the sidewalks still exist.